Alright everyone, it's time for Cenk versus Cenk, because you may have seen yesterday Cenk Uygur of the Young Turds had an epic meltdown on Twitter, an all-caps meltdown. Oh my god, Donald Trump is trying to stage a coup, he's trying to usurp democracy, he's a tyrant. He's trying to basically drum up faithless electors. It's interesting, though, link in the description, because Cenk was talking about wanting to go through the results of the last election with a fine-tooth comb in mid-December. Supposedly, Donald Trump is being an evil tyrant for not conceding. 3 weeks later, Cenk was still whining in the 2016 election because he didn't like the election results. Hell, it's funny because he technically, even if Biden gets in there, he doesn't even like Biden. He was a Bernie baby, so it's going to be funny to see him squirm for the next 2 years. It'll be funniest because he'll actually have a told you so moment, I think, in the midterms, because he's already warning the Democrats that they're setting themselves up for failure. Score one for him. I guess a broken clock is right occasionally. But with Cenk, not only that, but he's sitting there, he's talking about how Trump is tyrannical and acting like a dictator. Dictators do not request that other individuals option them for office on the basis that there's been fraud in an election. That's not being dictatorial. That's doing exactly what Cenk did in 2016. He was begging for faithless electors to stop Trump then too. Oh my god, but if only a few electors decide to stand on principle and keep Orange Man out of office, we can have President Madam Hillary Clinton. He was saying this outright. Fucking, you can read the archived tweets. Again, there's one in the description. He was talking about it in the last election openly. So were a lot of other leftists. It wasn't just him. Most of the left was that they had a massive hangover the next day, and they're like, oh my god, we can still stop him. It was the same tired canard, by the way, through the whole election. Even during the primaries, before Trump was even the candidate. During the primaries, even after Indiana came in, they're like, well, if Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio and John Kasich all team up, and two of them endorse the third, then they can still scratch together enough to go to a contested convention. They were still talking about that after Indiana voted. Dude, by the end of Super Tuesday, Trump was the prospective nominee. A couple states later, the writing was on the wall. The left has Trump derangement syndrome so badly, they think that he's such a fascist and such a terrible person that they literally want to see a usurpation of the entire political system. This is why I've suggested that SCOTUS, on principle, should decide the election for Trump even if they do not believe that fraud played a role in enough states. Because Joe Biden has been ambiguous on whether he would essentially subjugate the judiciary by expanding the Supreme Court to his political whim, essentially turning it into an extension of the executive branch. That's not the way it's meant to work. It's specifically meant, the separation of powers is specifically meant to slow down and prevent different bodies of government from acting. Why do you think a veto exists? A veto is essentially the chief executive, one man, or individual, one Zier, stopping the will of the people from the House, fundamentally. Especially if it gets overridden, of course, it's another story. You've got a majority of people representing a majority of the people in the U.S. By district being stymied by one individual. There's a purpose to that. There's a reason why 9 people on the Supreme Court, or more or less, depending on what era it is, if Biden gets rigged in there, can completely nullify legislation even if it's positive, simply on the basis that it doesn't comport to their understanding of the Constitution. Dude, government is slow for a reason. It's when government moves more quickly that there are problems. By the way, that almost always happens in times of stress and fear, like during a pandemic or after 9/11. Oh, we've got to do this quickly, and then everyone unanimously marches forward, and retrospectively, years later, we find usually the legislation was stupid, costly, and sometimes violated the U.S. Constitution. We found that about NSA surveillance. We were sold a pig in a poke. What about the bailouts that Obama authored? What about the war in Iraq? The invasion of Afghanistan that we're finally scaling back to a sub-war level? All of these things were bad ideas. About the Vietnam War. But we were sold it on fear. And that's what they're trying to do with legislation. The Democrats have been trying to pass trillions in legislation totally unrelated to pandemic response. With the understanding that, well, we've fucked the economy up, now we've got to repair the economy. No, the only way to repair the economy is to get your greasy mitts off of it. That's the whole fucking point. Cenk here doesn't lack self-awareness. He's just being a hypocrite. I'm sure that he recalls talking about faithless electors in 2016. It's just like when you say, well, there's been election rigging. Oh no, says Cenk as he puke burps into the microphone. That could never happen. But in 2016, he was talking about the fact that Putin and spy versus spy, Boris and Natalia bullshit supposedly was responsible for the election results then. Oh, if only a few faithless electors, if only a few of these glorious people decide to swing, then Trump will be denied office, said Cenk at the time, begging that to happen. Of course it didn't. Then you've got a situation now where that's a sign of tyranny now. In 2016, it was being noble, being graceful and American with apple pie and grandma in her rocking chair. Now it's evil and dictatorial to request the same thing. It's interesting how hypocritical some of these people are. I'm not surprised. After all, Cenk is just an ideologue sophist, and that's all he'll ever be. Yeah, he gets millions of dollars to basically parrot the left-wing talking points, for various corporate and other overlords, and that's what they represent. So it's still funny when the Young Turks claim to be independent media. No, you're a multi-million-dollar corporate entity at this point. You literally hang out with Silicon Valley CEOs. You're not independent. You're not some small-time dude with a webcam or something like that. Maybe you were 20 years ago, back when you were doing your shitty blog where you said sexist things and you had to apologize years later with the Me Too thing going on. Remember that? Remember how he was talking about, what was he talking about in his blog that one time about girls in Florida or something like that, and saying like weird, lurid, perverted shit about them, or girls somewhere in Central America or wherever he was at the time? I'm trying to think of Cenk trying to score a date, and I'm drawing a blank. But it's Cenk versus Cenk. Now, let's not be hypocrites, though. The Republicans are just as good at doing this. Again, the same people now that are saying, well, maybe faithless electors can stop Joe Biden if everything else falls through. Well, you weren't in 2016, you were saying that was a bad idea. Let's be goddamn reasonable here. That's not going to happen, and it's not feasible. The closest thing you can get to that is the possibility that Trump's legalism runs out the clock and you end up with not enough states certifying, and you end up having it ordered that the state legislatures get involved, most of them being Republican-leaning. That could happen. It's still a long shot, though. You're more likely to see a SCOTUS decision. You're more likely to see SCOTUS act on mail-in ballots in a plurality of these states, flipping these elections. That's the most likely path forward for Donald Trump at this particular juncture. He's claiming, his legal team is claiming they've got evidence that can back this idea. But SCOTUS has to take the case up. They might not. It could be a 5-4 decision. Kavanaugh could throw Trump under the bus. Alito could say, well, this is bullshit. We'll just deal with Joe Biden fucking around with the judiciary. I don't think that they should, but it's a possibility. It's definitely real. That's about all. Peace out.